Audio in games should be a subtlety. For us sound designers, we know we did our job properly if the sound design goes unnoticed. We create the sound effects for the game, implement them in the game, and then, well, it's in the game at that point. And then we don't hear back about the new sound effects in the game for some time from the lead game developer. And it's at this point we get the idea that they probably didn't notice our sounds. But this is a good thing, because like I said, sound design should be something that feels like it's a part of the game. If a sound doesn't fit in the world of the game, or with the rest of the sounds in the game, then it typically stands out and therefore doesn't really work. This is a consistent theme for audio in games, and it should be. Audio is a supporting role that should go unnoticed. The only times where audio is noticed is when the audio sucks or when a sound designer is listening for the sounds like I do with these sound analysis videos. But again, audio is a supporting role, so we can use it to support the gameplay and game design in a game. So audio is a great way to direct the attention of your player in games. Having your player focus on what you want them to focus on in a game can be a difficult task, because there's a lot of different things that you might want your player to focus on in the heat of the moment in the game, and if the game or the sound design is designed poorly, then you can lose the player's focus. If we're using the audio to direct the player's focus, we need to be able to get the player's attention while keeping them immersed in the world of the game. The focus of a game can depend on the specific moment in front of the player, the long-term objective at hand, and sometimes even something unconventional like the environment, which can be common among more atmospheric games. So the difficulty in achieving this idea of directing a player's attention is that if we make too much of an effort to direct a player's attention, then it breaks their focus from the game. I can think of tons of ways to direct a player's attention with sound in games, but not all of them are really good ideas. Like if we're playing Skyrim, and I wanted to direct the player's attention to a dragon, I could just download the Randy Savage mod to make dragons quote Randy Savage instead of Dragon Wars, and you would instantly notice it. Yeah! And while it is awesome, it's pretty dumb to do because it doesn't really make any sense to have a Randy Savage quoting dragon in the game. So it's important to sort of blend the sound you want to bring attention to within the rest of the world of the game, which, if I had to guess, is one of the main factors as to why Bethesda didn't use the Randy Savage mod in the main release of Skyrim. So for the rest of this video, we'll be showing off some cool examples of ways to use audio to direct a player's focus or attention in games. They're just some cool audible concepts that can be applied to a game, but it's also something that you may not ever notice because it's done properly. It's simple ways to grab your player's attention or help redirect their focus through sound. You'll see that there's no real set way to achieve this idea of directing a player's focus since every game can have a unique design to it, but you'll see that more than anything, it just takes some creativity and a little bit of thought to achieve this properly. Overwatch is a competitive team-based game where you shoot guns and weapons at each other to accomplish team-based objectives. The game modes can range from 3v3 or 6v6 or even 1v1. One really neat and simple example in Overwatch of directing focus is with how they prioritize the volume of sounds in the game. Remember, the game can be played with 12 players in a single fight, and sounds can get really complicated since so many different weapons and voices and miscellaneous noises can be played at once. So a sort of priority hierarchy needs to be set here. So from the perspective of the player, what do you think you'd need to hear first? Well, realistically, we'd probably say anything that's closest to the player. You'd hear your own gunshots and footsteps because those are the things that are closest to you. But is that really what you should be focusing on? What you really should be focusing on is the other player. And the sound designers for Overwatch know this because they actually make the other enemy footsteps and gunfire louder than your own. Let's put this in a real game example. You're playing a 1v1 elimination game where it's just you and one other player. You have no idea where the player is. But fortunately, Overwatch knows that you are trying to find that player. And through the walls you can hear their footsteps. And now we know where the other player is and can hopefully win the game. Do you see what I mean? The Overwatch developers know that you want to find the other enemy, and they use the audio as its supporting role to help direct the focus to the enemy player, because you're supposed to be killing the enemy team. And they were able to make the enemy player sounds a bigger priority by simply raising the volume of the footsteps. And if your own footsteps were too loud, then you may not have been able to hear them. A lot of times it's not necessarily directing the player's focus, but presenting it in front of the player to notice it on their own. And while it's not the only way to achieve it, this is a fine example of the art of indirectly directing focus with sounds in games. It may not be necessarily realistic for the player to hear the enemy footsteps first, but it's necessary in video games to change the realism in a game at times to make our design function properly and successfully. Sure, your footsteps would have been louder from a realism standpoint, but you aren't really going to be listening to your own footsteps. They're definitely there to let you know they are there, but they aren't necessarily important for you to be focusing on from a game design or gameplay perspective. It's more important to understand where the enemy is, because your focus is to find that enemy. Another awesome example is in Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. I actually did a sound analysis for Breath of the Wild, so you can check that out on the Blipsounds YouTube channel when you have time. There's a lot to do in Breath of the Wild, and I can't imagine the kind of sound design and prioritization that they had to set up with a variety of music, ambiences, voices, weapon sounds, creature sounds. They had a lot to consider when playing such a wide variety of sounds together. But one really simple example that they set up was when you are sneaking. Quite often you will need to sneak because a quest asks you to do so, or because you don't want to be seen by an enemy, among many other reasons. They also show a little purple waveform in the bottom right hand corner to show how loud you are being. It doesn't really help the point I'm making, but it's still a nice touch. So Breath of the Wild does something really cool, which is turning down the music in the background to accentuate the sound effects in the game. It makes you focus more on Link's movement, and because being sneaky involves being quiet, you probably want to hear how loud you are being. So Nintendo knew that it was pretty important for you to listen to the sounds Link is making. It sort of makes you hyper-focus on the environment as well. And every sound that is made seems so much more drastic because you are hyper-focusing on it. And again, it's literally just making you focus on Link's movement in the game because the sounds are tied directly to his movements. They really throw you in the experience of sneaking by boosting the volume of the sounds in the game when they turn down the music. The idea of directing focus in a game is sort of a vague topic because I can't really pinpoint it down to one specific thing. Like Breath of the Wild doesn't just have music or sounds to help change your focus. It also has mythical creatures, bosses, cutscenes, voice acting that they all balance. And each of those parts of the game try to pull you into the world of the game by what's happening directly in front of you. And they use the audio to support those moments. So how can you apply this to your games? Well, what's the focus of your game? Or better yet, what are the focuses? A complex game can have a lot of moving parts where you need to carefully design what the player should focus on depending on the very specific instances that are happening. And sometimes you have a very simple and overall emotion or theme to the game and you can cater your audio to help bring attention to that. A perfect example of this is in Limbo. One of the biggest themes throughout Limbo is its atmosphere. And as you can probably guess, Limbo uses their audio really well to help bring this out. So this is something that many people may not know, but a great way to portray atmosphere in a game is through your ambiences. If you don't know about ambiences, ambiences are simply just the noise that you would hear in the background of a game or film. Something like crickets chirping at night, waves on a beach, the sound of the wind in the mountains. Ambiences aren't necessarily anything that you see in a game, like you can't see the wind in the mountains, or you can't see the crickets chirping at night, but they create a sort of invisible imagery. You hear the sound and it creates a fulfilling soundscape that you can listen to and tie to the artistic direction of the game to create a unique experience for the player. So throughout Limbo, the environment changes pretty constantly. You'll see the world of Limbo start off fairly simple, and the game eventually adopts an almost futuristic and industrial kind of feel to it. As you can probably guess, Limbo helps display this change in environment and atmosphere in a very subtle way by changing the ambiences ever so slightly. Before we jump into this, there's another idea to help us direct our focus that I should mention. It's basically a small idea where if we see a pattern over and over again, we create an expectation for what will come next in the pattern, and therefore we eventually stop taking notice to it as it becomes repetitive and our mind adjusts to that pattern. However, if you were to change up that pattern slightly, then you would notice that something different happened, and that redirects our focus to it. So from an audio perspective, if you're listening to one piano note over and over again, it kind of just doesn't matter after a certain point because you understand the pattern that is coming your way. It becomes background noise. But once you change the rhythmic pattern or the note that you are playing, then you notice a difference. So ambiences can be compared in this way because, like I just said about the piano notes, it's background noise, except it literally is treated as background noise. So it's important to change up these ambiences as the game continues since the game is more focused on its atmosphere, and a great deal of atmosphere in a game is created in its ambient sounds. So in Limbo, the change from simple and primitive world takes a steady transition over time to the industrial landscape, and the background ambiences slowly transition with it. It happens from moment to moment in the entire game. See if you can pick it out. You'll hear a very slight change in the background ambiences. This is something that happens throughout the entire game, and it slowly transitions ambiences all the time, and it eventually gets to that industrial ambience that we were talking about. Even when the world looks exactly the same as the section before it, the ambiences often change very slightly, and it's just enough to feel like a new area, but not changing enough to feel like a jarring change. I can definitely understand that people may think that this is an overly specific example and it's not a necessary kind of detail that needs to be focused on in a game, but I really think that it's ideas like this that sets a game apart from the rest. Not necessarily because of the audio, but because of the attention to detail. As far as Limbo is concerned, they could have just used a looping foresty ambience throughout the whole game, but the question is, does the world that is created by the audio reflect the world that is created by the art? Absolutely. And in my opinion, or at least in Limbo's case, the audio helps create the art direction. Since most of the game holds a steadily similar aesthetic, with its black, gray, and white colors, these ambient sound changes are more important than ever to help the game feel like it's changing environments. And this helps us become sucked into the atmosphere created by Limbo. And by creating the subtle changes in that environment over time, Limbo is able to really direct your focus to the world you're encompassed in while playing. Limbo is a great example of a game that has a very specific through line and theme that the game always comes back to, which is the atmospheric experience of the game. This is what the main focus of Limbo is. However, not every game is like Limbo. Many games have a variety of things to focus on. Going back to Overwatch again, Overwatch has a crazy in-depth hierarchy of things to focus on that I didn't mention, and they pay a great attention to detail on what should be prioritized in every moment of the game. Like we mentioned before, they prioritize the sound of the enemy footsteps and weapon sounds since we need to know how close the enemy could be or where they are. But Overwatch actually takes this a step further by prioritizing the risk of danger of certain enemies through audio. The weapons are louder than the footsteps, and then a lot of the secondary weapons and abilities are louder than the primary weapons, and then the ultimate abilities are louder than the secondary abilities. And on top of that, when a specific player on the enemy team is doing really well and dominating your team, that enemy specifically will be louder than the rest of the enemy team, because he is a bigger threat. Each sound that is louder than the last displays the level of danger and therefore a hierarchy of things that you should be focusing on. And sure, this is definitely a natural hierarchy of danger that the audio should reflect, but it's actually a lot more useful than you may think. With the fast-paced nature of Overwatch, you only have so much time to react to something that is happening in the moment. And we also have to worry about the potential danger of the enemy teams in Overwatch. So a hero like D.Va can come in like this and do a self-destruct sequence and destroy your whole enemy team. But because D.Va yelled, "Nerf this," at the beginning of her ultimate ability, and the sound designers for Overwatch mixed it to be much louder than the rest of the audio in the game, our team's focus was redirected to D.Va's self-destruct, and is able to get out of the way safely. And this isn't an easy task either. Like I said earlier, there can be 12 people fighting at once, and to be able to hear the more important sounds, which direct your focus, over everything else in the game is, well, it's important. If there isn't a notification of sound for the dangerous weapons or enemies in the game, then we won't have our attention directed to it. And sure, there are other ways to direct a player's focus, like movement for example is a great way to draw someone's eye, or maybe a contrasted color in the game. But this isn't always a viable option because the art can be fairly limited to what the game design dictates. So using the audio to help give off the sense of priority and focus is an excellent tool for Overwatch in this system. This idea of directing focus in your game with sound requires some experience with sound design that can take some time to develop. Remember, sound design is an art form, and much like many art forms, you just have to make a decision based off how you feel about it. So a good rule of thumb is just to use your ears as best as possible, and make the best judgment you can. And make sure to try to add some purpose to your sound design instead of just adding sound just because games should have sound. Because it really is the difference between just having sound and having sound design in your game. Start becoming a better sound designer by creating the sound in your game with intent. And like many of the examples I've shown here in this video, I bet that you'll find that strategically using your sound in games will help supplement your gameplay experience. Thanks for watching, everyone. Hey guys, thanks for watching. I just wanted to tell you guys that I am giving away a free beta for a course I'm working on in exchange for feedback on it before I release it to the public. So if you're interested in learning sound design, then please join the Discord channel by clicking the link below and send me, Ryan Stunkel, a direct message and I can talk with you about receiving your free course and giving feedback. Anyway, I hope to see you guys there. Thanks for watching.